can.
Hooray! Alrighty, welcome back, party people, to Mountain Goat Gaming. We are here with a special guest who I'm going to introduce first because I've already started this. Welcome, Andrew, to the channel.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Yeah, mate, thank you for having us. Pretty much is where I'm at. And join with me today is my lovely co-host, Sean, who claims to run a Cavalry Army, but ends up running a Trebuchet. So we're here to hopefully enlighten Sean a little bit on how to play SBG without, just all the time.
You take a trebuchet once and you become the trebuchet man.
Absolutely. So, guys, we're here to talk today about all things cavalry.
Jay, the word you're looking for is cavalry. This stuff. What you said was Calvary. This place. The hill Jesus died on.
And specifically, when you take a full Cav army, what does it look like? How do you win games? And is it a viable option? So I personally...
The answer is yes.
As a complete fly on the wall, we've brought an expert on, which is Andrew, because he has won quite a few games, the odd tourney here and there, so I've heard. And honestly, I just want to pick his brain, to tell you the truth. So I hope you enjoy. Before we get too far into this, can we please make sure that you like, share, subscribe, and hit the ding button? That way, when we start talking, you start listening. And yeah, love you. Andrew, tell us about your history in the game, how long you've been playing, and why did I say in the Masters video to reach out when I saw your pretty much all Cav list?
Okay, so for those who haven't met me, I'm Andrew. I started playing this game when the Mines of Moria Blue Box set came out, whenever that was.
Damn, that was a hot minute ago.
It was a while ago, yes. So that was a very casual kind of thing. I was a little kid at the time, but I captured my imagination, always loved Lord of the Rings, always loved toy soldiers. So those two things married together just were really great attraction for me. So I very casually kind of enjoyed putting that together, painting up a few things. I remember the Last Alliance forums was a thing back then. I spent some time hanging out on that, lurking on that. But I kind of left it for a few years, and then I came back in 2012 when the Hobbit editions came out, and I started going to tournaments. So first tournament I went to was properly competing was Clash of the Titans in 2012, and kind of never looked back. I looked at the Victorians and I thought, wow, these guys are really good at playing this game. I want to learn how to play. So I spent a few years, I'd go down to all the major Victorian tournaments and get spanked by them until eventually decided I wanted to find my own way to start beating them. And then that eventually led me into the all cavalry route, and I really never looked back. I think it's fair to say I'm probably the most successful player in New South Wales. I've won 3 Masters. I've won Clash of the Titans, come second in both of them a bunch of times. There's a event here in Sydney that I won for 6 years in a row. So
Let's
yeah,
go.
I've had some good successes. I think it's fair to say.
And that's why we've got you here, mate.
We should have brought the best player in Australia, so he calls himself, on the channel, bro. We've got a rival.
Yeah, I was about to say there is some competition brewing here between you and Alex now. Who truly is the best?
Well, we've never actually played each other, so time will tell, I guess.
Set it up. Let's go.
Different states, doesn't matter.
That'll be an interesting game to watch. Absolutely. I think you and me have played one game in the past, Mr. Andrew.
Yes, I'm trying to rack my brain back. When was it? It was
Ardor Unleashed in like 2020, I think it was.
Yeah.
And it was that doubles game. Yeah.
Yes. That's right. Yes.
Yeah.
And you beat me. You got a 100% win record. There you go.
Oh. The only thing I remember from that game, I never remembered if I won, lost, or drew that game. The only thing I remember is you popping Blinding Light with Kierdan, I think it was, and Girion just one-shotting him through Blinding Light. That's the only thing I remember.
I do remember that. Yes, that is ringing a bell.
Only thing I remember. And
yes.
It was a good time.
Happy memories.
Andrew, what drew you to basically running lots of cavalry armies all the time?
Yep.
Why now?
So it started with Rivendell Knights. So
the gateway drug of cavalry armies.
Yeah, pretty much I'd say. So it started with Rivendell Knights. I won Masters for the first time in 2016 with those. and I just fell in love with the play style that was there. And funny enough, as we'll probably talk about in some ways, it had the list I was running at that time had everything that you could possibly want in a cavalry army. It had magic, it had lots of heroes, it had really hard hitting power, it had good shooting, heaps of control, and I just really enjoyed being able to play all those things. It felt like you were always dictating the pace of the game and what you wanted to do, and your opponent was always having to respond to you rather than the other way around. And being able to dictate the game, I think, is a really big thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that's really good about that army, because I've played it myself a few times, is that it's not an autopilot list. You can't just put it on the table and play it and win. You still it's still a challenging army to use, and you've still got to really think. And they're the kind of armies that those top end players love to play. They really get them tickling their brains. So yeah, and
just to build on that as well, and we'll probably talk about it in more depth as well. There are a lot of principles that carry across all your different cavalry armies, but all of them have their own little unique niches or tricks or things you're going to be doing them. They're going to be different to the other ones. And so even once you played one cavalry army, you can go and jump to another, and then find that there's new things for you to explore, to try out, depending on what profiles that particular list has, or what kind of composition you're going to be building them and what points level that's going to be at as well. So there's heaps of different variety within that sub-genre, I guess, if we want to call it that.
That's actually a really nice segue, because my next question was going to be, what do you think the skill cap is to start performing with, cav armies? Is it a high ceiling? Is it quite a low ceiling to start getting results with them? Obviously, I think once you're in and you are performing, to master it, we all know this game has a massive ceiling. I think it's actually a little harder with pure cav armies, because you're restricting your list building aspect, which is something that I like to not. Hence why I'm a Filthy Yellow Alliance soup man. But let's say, for example, a new player comes to you and they say, hey, I want to go a full cav army. What are some of the tips that you're going to give them, I suppose, straight away? Or I suppose, let's say, tips and tricks to be successful with a cav army?
Yep. I would say the floor is high. It's definitely high, because a cavalry army is naturally going to be more punishing both for you and your opponent. If you make mistakes, every model you lose, almost always you're going to have less than your opponent is. So every model that you lose, you're going to feel more than you might with a conventional balanced army. So the floor is definitely higher. I would probably not suggest it for someone who's brand new, unless you love Rohan or something and you're inspired by it and you just want to enjoy the experience of that. But then, play what you want. That's the whole point of the game. From a strategic point of view, they do require more thought and more patience than an average infantry army will. You've got to be considering more things and be looking a turn or two ahead. So the main tips I think I would offer for someone who wants to start dipping their toes into cavalry lists is to think about, get into the habit of thinking about what's going to be happening on your next turn. What can I do? What can my opponent do? And where are they going to get up to? Where can I get up to? Is that further than they can get to? And just, I'd say the single most important thing is to be planning a turn ahead so that you know what's going to happen next turn and you're not caught out, because that's something that's going to apply across every single cavalry army you play.
I think that leads nicely into this next slide here, which is what defines a cavalry army?
Anything on a 40 mil base. No.
So my definition is anything that can move fast and outmaneuver your opponent and hit a part of them with your whole army, while the other half of theirs is somewhere else. So I think mobility is the key defining thing, and hitting power. So something like a Wild Warg Chieftain, it's not technically cavalry, it doesn't have the keyword, but it's got great hitting power and it's got great mobility. So I definitely slot it into that kind of style of army. But then obviously anything on a horse, anything on a warg, anything on a chariot, anything on a camel, anything on a fell beast, a murmak.
What about a bear?
I'd say no to a bear, because everything that you bring with the bear is going to be much slower than it.
Love it.
Yeah.
Fair
I think
enough.
that's probably a really big defining feature of cavalry army in itself, is you're not taking a cavalry army if you've got 4 or 5 cavalry models within the army.
Yep.
But if you're majority mounted or majority fast moving, hard hitting, as Andrew said, then that would define it as a cavalry army.
Yep, I think I definitely agree with that. You need to be able to have that mobility. The mobility is the key stat. if you look at the movement value and the average is below 8 or so, you're not a cavalry army.
Oh, below 8. I was going to say all goat
Oh,
riders.
Yeah,
but,
goat riders are the 8 inches.
Yeah.
I mean, marauders are an interesting kind of side topic because they do a lot of similar ideas to the cavalry in terms of maneuver, but not quite so much the impact of the hitting power in some ways. But yeah, a lot of the principles we talk about in terms of movement you could apply to Uruk-hai marauders as well.
Yeah, that's fair.
Interesting. This is like a bit of a shout out to our previous video on skew lists with good mate Elias from Cracker Milk. In my mind, Cav armies are complete skew lists. They do one thing, it's the movement phase, and I think sometimes a shooting phase with a couple of things sprinkled into it, but movement phase is their jam, right? You, like you said before, right? You control, are you getting hit? Or are you not getting hit? That pace and flow of the game is solely in your hands, because most of the times you're pretty much doubling some of the armies. In some cases, you are doubling their movement, and they're never going to catch you, even with marches. So that to me is effectively, I suppose, leaning into a bit of the tactics that we've previously spoken on the channel. If you haven't seen the video, please go and check it out. But I think it's a good challenge, and it's very rewarding. And I think versing a full cav army is really intimidating. My first experience was versing Khand. I remember looking across this sea of 40 and, you know, whatever the 50 mil bases that the chariots were on, and just, it was terrifying the amount of board space that army filled in their deployment zone. Like, we were playing Storm the Camp, and I was like, they're not going to fit. They're just not going to fit. And then I was versing the Warg Angmar Legion just the other week. We were playing Divide and Conquer. And whilst the Wargs go down quickly, they have a good punch ability. I sat there and I thought to myself, like, how in sweet shit am I going to try and punch through all of this space when I'm playing with 25 mil bases and they're effectively playing, you know, nearly double my base size. So that scare factor alone can be quite overwhelming as an opponent, to try and, I suppose, critically think through what do you need to do and where are you going to do it when going into a full cav army.
Yeah, just two last thoughts on that. I will say the most recent tournament I went to at Masters last weekend, I had multiple opponents who sat there and think like, gosh, I don't know quite what to do here. That it can get into your head seeing the sea of cavalry across on the other side of the field. And then that plays into, you need to make sure as the cavalry player that you're trying to be decisive, you're not taking too long in your turns, because then the game will not be able to finish properly and you might run out of time. So you want to make sure you're really being decisive in your decisions once you've made them, and making sure you're making efficient use of your time.
Which just leads back to what you said before, in the sense of you want to be thinking one, I think maybe 2-3 turns ahead, I'm going to do this, they'll retaliate here for me to then do that. That whole step one back and forth, it's like in soccer when you do the whole 1-2. I'm going to pass to my mate, he'll then pass to me, so I can avoid that situation. It's very much like a cavalry situation here, where I need to do this so that way they do that, then I can achieve that objective. I think that pretty much sums it up, hopefully, in like a little nutshell. Now, how do you breach a D6 war? Because this is something, as a D6 OnlyFans guy that I am, I really struggle to take anything that is lower than D6 in my army. So I'm thinking, let's shout out a couple of meta things. Black Numenorians, Easterlings, Minas Tirith, Royal Guard, all of those high defense bricks that you typically will see SBG players form up and hold a choke point with. What do you do?
So yeah, I would say let's bump this up. Let's go D7 and D8 as well. Because everything's going to be the same. And Minnesota, and then at Shield Wall, Found Court Guard, Dwarves, Iron Hills, they're all tanky stuff as well. Your ideas are going to be very similar. If you just charge your run-of-the-mill cavalry into there, or Bride of Rohan or something like that, into it, it might get a kill or two, but then it's going to founder and it's going to bounce off. You have to take into account a lot of things. In terms of a mission, do you need to even charge that D6 defense wall, or can you just go around it and go for an objective? Okay, great, then don't charge it. The first thing to decide is whether you need to charge that wall, because if you don't, just don't charge it. Sit there and shoot it. If it has to come to you because you're playing something like to the death and you've got a shooty cavalry army, well then you're never going to charge the wall in the first place. So the first thing to decide is whether you actually need to crack it out of position. But you know, if you're playing it a mission where you need to get an objective, and this D6 or D7 wall is in front of you, and you do have to charge it, there's a bunch of ways you can go about doing that, and that depends on what the tools you are that are brought. If you have any magic, that's step one. You use that to try and crack it and break it open. If you have a ring wraith and still fear, that's a great way to shatter a shield wall and let your cavalry run through. If you have compels or sorcerer's blast, you can use those to poke little holes in it. If you've got specters, great, again, another, or wood elf sentinels or something like that, you can pull things out of the line. Those are good ways to kind of break it up before you even get there. The other thing is using your heroes as the tip of the spear. So you want your heroes to be the ones who are actually going to be breaching that wall, because quite often they will have the strength values will be the differential, making them more likely to punch through that wall on top of having all the extra attacks. So you want them to be really leading the charge when it comes to cracking through if you're just slamming into it from the front. Ideally, what you also want to be doing is you'll be trying to flank them. So you're going to have cavalry that are coming around each of the sides. So some of them might be hitting them from the front, but you've also got ones that are coming through the side, and you're trying to coordinate them to come at the back, whether that's by taking out spear supports or forcing them to commit forces elsewhere, so that wall at the front that you're trying to crack through isn't quite as strong as you might hope it would be. Those are all kind of like the real basics. If you guys want to jump in, and then I can talk about some more specifics from there.
Just as Andrew said, if you don't need to charge a wall, you don't need to charge it. Don't do it. Does that lead towards that, semi-bad experience for both players? Yes and no. So I love Cavalry Armies. I think they're bloody brilliant. But what's your thoughts there on, potential bad not matchups, but play experiences for people? I know this isn't about breaching D6 walls, but
yeah. So I will say this: I play my Cavalry Armies at interstate tournaments. So somewhere I know people are coming there, they've flown somewhere else, you're coming here because you want to compete. So that's the spirit I normally take Cavalry Armies in, is that I will assume that my opponent has come there with the intent of competing as well. So they should be packing in their toolbox things that they can use to answer a person who kites away. Whatever that is, shooting, magic, cavalry of their own, lots of heroes, high defense, whatever it is. I'm assuming that the person that I'm coming to has come with a similar thought of, like, I'm going to make sure I've got things in my toolbox as well, so that I can deal with this kind of scenario if I end up in it.
But also, that mutual understanding that you guys are here to play a competitive game.
Yep, that's right. That doesn't mean like we're playing a nasty game. You're there to still have fun, but I think the enjoyment comes from the challenge of setting those scenarios up against each other and seeing how the other person can solve them. And I think that's where the enjoyment of a competitive game comes from. It's not from being a real prick who says, you're a quarter of an inch out there, sorry, I triple checked with my laser here. That's kind of defeating the whole point. It's about you thinking about what your plan is and how you're going to try and deal with what the other person's doing, and then reacting to the luck of the dice as it comes along throughout the game.
I think, Sean, I get where you're coming from 100%, because I thought reconnoiter, right?
Yeah.
All I'm going to do here is try and, like, as the person playing the Cav army, I'm going to try and just go, and then go wham and try and get off the board. That's game plan. As the opponent, I need to sit there and go, where are the channels, where are the chokeholds, and where can I try and catch the cavalry out? Whilst they are moving, sometimes up to 15 inches or more, that is a real challenge in the sense of I've got 1 to 2 turns to set up in deployment as much of a net as possible. A really great showcase of this is on the Battle Campers stream of the Nations Cup. It was one of the first games where I can't remember who was versing who, but it was Black Riders or Cav Army, very let's use for that word, non-player experience, as in one person is rolling dice, the other person's going I'm doing nothing, versus Bears, right? Now, this is a top tier competitive Nations Cup. The Bear player ended up catching a couple of the Black Riders due to mispositioning a couple of the ring wraiths, and they actually caught them in the corner and slapped them in a heartbeat. So I definitely think the challenge, like what Andrew was just saying before, of how can I overcome this challenge? Because no matter what army or what game you play, there's always a challenge. I just think that an all-cav army exacerbates, I suppose, that initial oh my god challenge, because of A, the size that we've already spoken about, and B, the sheer movement capability of that army. Now, one of the most strongest legendary legions for an all cav army, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew, I think would be Riders of Théoden.
Yep, it's definitely up there.
If you want breaching power, you want strength, you want might across the board, basically for free, that's the Legion for you. And we have seen this dominate at a lot of points levels. In my mind, 600 points, 500 points, that's a real niche spot for Riders of Théoden, because there's not a whole lot of big heroes, there's not a whole lot of crazy magic, but you still get the tools of what Riders of Théoden are giving you. So for a lot of the times when people are trying to plan for how to mitigate that death turn, it's very much the same situation of what can you do as a D6, D8 line to help break apart. That way it's lots of 1-on-1s or 2-on-1s or 4-on-1s or whatever it may be. Does that seem fair to say?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Sometimes what a cavalry player hates is someone just marches and gets right in your face right from the start, because then you've got no time to do all your little tricks and shenanigans. They just like, okay, you've got to deal with me now because I'm going to charge you next turn unless you do something.
Yeah.
So you can, as an infantry or conventional army player, you can still definitely force the issue for a cavalry player. You still have the ability to take matters into your own hands and say, hey, I'm here now. You've got to deal with me.
And just as a final note, some of those tools as an all infantry army would be march, would be drums, or would be Easterlings.
Both. Why not both, hey?
Why not all three?
Yep, all in one.
There are definitely counters. By no stretch of the measure are we sitting here saying that, oh, you're running an all-cav army. If you master this, you'll win every single game. Yeah. But it definitely,
they are
the opponent, it's
tricky.
A big learning curve really, really quickly. So, yeah.
Look, I think it's also, before we got on the card, I guess, each cav army is so different to each other. We talk about Rivendell Knights. You take a full Rivendell Knight cav army. You can take a full Minas Tirith cav army if you so wish. I don't highly recommend that at all.
Better at low points.
Yeah, absolutely. You can take Warg Riders, and they each do something just a little bit differently, and they've each got different ways of, potentially breaking those D6 walls or dragging your opponent out so that you can get those 1-on-2s in your favor and so on.
I will say as well, something I should mention is, generally speaking, when you're charging that wall, you want to do it on a turn where you have lost priority. So where your opponent has already moved all this stuff, so they're not going to be able to reposition for your charge, because you want that initial charge that you're going to get off, because you should be getting it off unless something really strange or dramatic has happened in your game. This is the thing that your opponent cannot answer, so you want to make sure that you get the maximum value from it, and you can ensure that happens if you're charging once your opponent's already moved all their stuff.
And this is where Elrond is bloody brilliant.
I feel like we've already alluded to it a little bit, but how long typically, like in terms of minutes and hours, would you consider kiting? Or I suppose, at what goal are you trying to achieve with kiting before you go in?
That's going to depend on how much shooting you have. If you have lots of shooting, you'll generally be kiting for longer. So, if you're Rivendell Knights, they're probably going to be kiting longer for something that is all melee, like your Far Harad, where they just want to get stuck in there. So to some degree, it depends on the cavalry army that you have. It also depends on who is winning and losing priority. Because if you keep winning priority for lots of turns, you probably are going to end up kiting for longer, because like I said, you really want to try and make sure that those charges you're getting are when you've lost priority. So sometimes I find that your game plan is flexible and you'll be kiting for longer if you keep winning priority, because you need to make sure, and obviously the circumstances may change. Sometimes you just need to get stuck in there. But if you got the option to, it's usually a good idea to try and kite until you do not have priority more, so that way you can get your uninterrupted charges in. It might also be you are trying to eliminate key parts of your opponent's army with shooting or with magic or with something else before you commit in as well. So to give you an example from last weekend, I played a Corsair army that had a bosun and a bunch of Reavers, and I said, okay, I'm not charging in until I've destroyed that bosun with my 2 ring wraiths, and then the Reavers have gone off and disappeared, and then I can go in, and then I'll be much happier doing that. Or it might be I want to try and knock out that banner before I go in, or it might be I want to try and pull my opponent apart. That's a big part of the kiting part. Is I'm going to start off on the left side of the board, and they deploy most of the stuff over here, and they got a little bit on the right. I'm now going to kite all my way over to the right. I've moved there in 2 turns, it's going to take them 5. So great, those 2 turns of kiting now meant that I picked off a part of their army, and I've used that to pull them apart like a ball of string. The ball of string has now been unraveled, now I can go in. So sometimes the kiting is a matter of however long it takes to try and string my opponent's army out, depending on what mission or scenario you might be playing.
And I like what you've just said there, because kiting isn't just sitting there and shooting.
Yep.
Kiting, you can have no shooting in your cav army, and you can still kite your opponent. It's all about, as Jay said earlier, movement phase is what cavalry do best, and it's about having that optimal move phase, using the move phase to pull your opponent, as you said, into a yarn, a string, or whatever, so that they're in a not optimal situation for when you decide, cool, this is where I punch you. Bang.
Yep, and sometimes you can do it in several stages as well. You can commit a few on one side, see if your opponent says, oh, I'm going to send a whole bunch of guys over there, and say, great, everyone else is going on the other side now.
Yeah.
And my 2 guys or 3 or whatever I sent in there, they'll just head off and leave again. So you can almost feint with a cavalry army if you want, or you can put, there are 2 cavalry models that you can charge here if you'd like to come up and get to these 2. The rest of them will be out of range, but you can get these 2 if you like. And then if they don't take it, then say, well, these 2 are now just going to go in and go over here. Do you want to do something now about them? Those are kind of things that you can do. So you can force your opponent into difficult decisions.
You've segued that perfectly into what I was just about to ask now. So let's say, for example, you're playing throwing spears out the wazoo Rohan.
Yep.
Then all of a sudden, do you sit there just outside of 6 inches of a normal infantry line, or are you trying to back yourself up right on that 8-inch mark and almost form like a bit of a circle? Obviously, situation dependent, but as a general rule of thumb, would you rather sit 8 inches away or 6.1 inches away?
The throwing spear, 6.1, because your cavalry bases are big, and being the 6 means that you can usually try and get an extra guy in there potentially if they want to wrap around a flank. Being that little bit closer means that you've got more ability to wrap around their flanks for when you do want to get in, and it means you're giving up less ground to them, and if they run away the other way, it's easier for you to catch up to them as well. So you want to be at the closest possible safe distance is usually what I think, unless you're a really shooty army that just wants to be a million miles away, or they've got heaps of magic or things that are going to come flying into you and rip you apart.
Fair. Then my next question will lead into, how do you best mitigate the double turn effectively of like prior? So you have priority, you hop out, they move in, and then they win priority the next turn. Like that's my example of a double turn, because that, like, I've played a few like full partish cav armies, and that's always been my biggest headache and something I'm really struggling to get my head around. Is hence why I kind of break my cav up into small chunks. So you're never going to hit all of them. You're going to hit tiny little portions that I will let you hit. And if you hit them, you're spreading. What do you do?
Second wave tactics.
Yep, there's 2 things here. First one is the first thing I said as a suggestion for new player. You need to be thinking ahead. Mm-hmm. So it's not just, okay, I've moved this turn, they're going to move this turn. What happens if they win priority move the turn afterwards? So if you, and this is part of what I mentioned before with kiting as well, if you've won priority as a cavalry player, you need to make sure wherever you finish up, there's 12 inches of distance between you and that block of infantry. Because otherwise, you might lose out and you might get charged. So you need to make sure that you're maintaining that distance. And then you also need to be thinking about how many times can I get away with doing that? Because I might be close to the end of the board, or I might be giving up every single objective on the board. And if that's the case, you want to start doing some of the stuff you talked about there. You will start having multiple stages of your cavalry. You have a few at the front to maybe entice them to come in and charge you, and then you'll have ones behind. Or you might be splitting up to try and force them again, try and spread your opponent's army out, so it's not all concentrated in one spot, because your cavalry is going to be its maximum efficiency when you've got most of your army fighting only a little bit of theirs.
Now, I know I've just said specifically might expenditure here, but I would also like to, I suppose, delve into magic as well. Before, I think on the first slide, you said something along the lines of specters, sentinels, and magic are really good ways to break up an army. All of those involve, one, apart from the instill fear, which can, keyword, affect multiple units to move away from you. Typically speaking, one of the most reliable ways to break up a line in SBG is to remove one model from a line. Typically speaking, that will be one troop unit from their line, breaking it up a little bit. Out of a full, let's say 12, 25 mil base wide, you're taking one out, now they're at 11. Why is that so impactful, and why Like, I suppose, what might and will are you planning for if you get that situation and you can kind of either pounce and continue on or pounce and go back?
Okay, so cavalry armies, to borrow a gaming term, can be a bit of a snowball. So the idea of it is the small advantages you get at the beginning, as the snowball starts rolling down the mountain, they compound upon themselves and get bigger and bigger. Every model that you remove is a model that you don't have to kill later. Is an attack that's not coming back at you later. Is another model that won't be able to charge you if they catch you flat-footed. You're almost always, except in very strange circumstances, or if someone's also brought a skew list, you're going to be outnumbered as a cavalry player. So if you can even up the amount of models, let's say you've got a cavalry army of about 20 models, they got an army that's somewhere in the mid to low 30s. If you can knock out 5 or 6, suddenly that difference between the two is far less, and each of your cavalry models is going to have far more impact in the game than each one of their infantry models. So the idea is you want to try and spend resources using your advantage of mobility, using the advantage of having these heroes that you can put into the spots where they can try and kill something or pick something off, and use that to even out the disadvantage you're going to have in terms of numbers. And if you can do that, you have a big advantage, because like we said, your cavalry are going to be worth more than each individual infantry model on a one-to-one basis.
So let's use Riders of Théoden as an example, because the might expenditure here for that turn of death is effectively free, right?
Yep.
Typically, there are 2 ways you can run Riders of Théoden. The first way being lots of captains and your named heroes with minimal Royal Guard. The option 2 would be, I suppose, not so much maxing out, but having at least, 10 to 12 Royal Guard, and then your main heroes with a couple of captains, if that. Depending on how people like to play, depends on how quickly you can crack through that line. Let's set the scene. You're going into my Easterlings are in front of me, my Easterling line with Riders of Théoden, right? Riders of Théoden are going to come in because they have done their kiting. They've maybe killed a couple here and there because they have throwing spears. And then from there, you're going to call your turn of death initially when you hit. What's your thought process there, and what are you trying to achieve on that first turn?
So on that first turn, the idea is to do as much damage as possible, as safely as possible. So you want to try and work out, what can I realistically try and get rid of in this turn? We're again assuming that we've lost priority, we've set ourselves up nicely, so we're going to maximize the amount of impact that we're going to have here. We want to try and knock off as many things as possible, and that will depend upon what kind of scenario we're in here. So let's say that in this scenario with our Easterlings, we've got a couple of Easterling heroes at the front, some of those nasty Fight 6 ones that our Fight 5 Rohan heroes don't like. We might want to put multiple heroes onto one guy and threaten doing a combat plus strike to start drawing out some of the resources of those Easterling heroes, because you've identified them as the main threat come future turns when they're going to come and smack back into you. Let's say a couple of heroes have wandered off and they're somewhere else. Your job might now be to try and punch through the line so that you can try and get to the Dragon Emperor who's hiding behind all these Easterling things. And if you can get to him and tie him up, that's great. You can try and disable him and try and take him out of the game. So you're going to have to assess at that moment, okay, what is my priority for winning this particular game, or winning in this particular scenario that I have here in front of me? And that sometimes that comes down to the mission that you're playing, the terrain that you have in front of you, all those kind of things. So it really is, part of the joy of cavalry is you really have to make sure that you're reacting to the specifics of the moment you're in, so that every single scenario that you're in, you're going to have slight tweaks to what you're going to be doing. But in general, your principles are the same. You want to work out, what are the things that I need to eliminate on this turn? How can I do so most effectively? What's going to cause me the most grief in the future? How far do I need to commit because of that? And those are things that you're just going to have to judge as you play. The more that you play, the more experience you get at assessing what that is. But generally speaking, that will be your opponent's heroes. That will be large monsters. That will be key parts for a mission. If you're playing Fog of War and there's a hero you need to get to, you might want to be focusing your efforts on that part of the line. You might be trying to get to a particular objective. So you might need to be trying to aim to just try and get one model through to the back line, and you're not worrying about having anyone else back there, because their job is just to hold everyone else up. So you need to be able to assess that and then decide, okay, now that I've done that, what resources do I have at my disposal to make it happen? So it can be calling heroic combats. It can be trying to angle so you've got lots of one-on-ones. So you're maximizing the effectiveness of your cavalry. It might be, I'm just trying to get a break as quickly as possible, and I've already killed a bunch of models over here. So I'm just trying to optimize the combat. So I try and get that number of models killed. I'm not going to try and go for the maximum because I'm hoping that they'll run away next turn anyway. So it all just depends on what that scenario is going to be.
Jesus Christ, what a wealth of knowledge. That was great. I think what you've done there, Andrew, is effectively sum up SPG tactics and forward thinking in a really nice nutshell. Like, obviously we're here to talk about Cav armies, but like, this is such a great way to, I suppose, highlight your plan of attack and stick to your plan whilst forward thinking. So that way, when the time comes, you're obviously trying to achieve the objectives of the mission, score as many points as you possibly can, or let's, for a better term, find out what your win condition is. If this is your win condition, breakthrough, get the hero, breakthrough, get that objective, breakthrough, break myself, get that objective. That's what you're going to do. And you try and angle yourself, I suppose, finagle whatever you possibly can to achieve that as quickly as possible, then get out. Then don't worry about the rest of it. I think the reason why we're spotlighting this with the Cav army is because it's like almost playing SPG on a bit of hard mode. Every loss you take with the Cav army really hurts. Reason why is they're pretty much double the points of a normal infantry model. Hence why you're at the model disadvantage. So the snowball effect can also go the other way with the Cav army.
100%.
You can snowball to victory, you can snowball to a defeat and basically get tabled as well. And it's a bit demoralizing too. I think what we're trying to do here as best we can is just highlight what to look for and how to have less of those demoralizing victories or demoralizing losses as well. So I think that, yeah. What do you reckon, Sean?
Yeah, look, Cavalry. Oh man! So this tournament the other weekend, 11th run by Reese. I ran that all-mounted Gondor list with a trebuchet, and I had this one game against Elias, who was running his troll, his fellowship troll army, so just birder and cave trolls. And I set up this perfect turn, perfect charge. I was getting 3 to 4 knights on each troll. I'm sitting there going, cool, I might lose a couple of fights, but he can't roll 6s in every single fight, can he? He sure bloody can. And then you lose a bunch of knights and you go, yeah, cool, I can't win from here. And I think that's a big thing with cavalry armies is once you've lost, it is very hard to come back. Once there's this threshold that you hit, and once you've hit it, you go, yeah, okay, cool. I can't really do much about this. And that's where that snowball effect that you guys were talking about comes in really heavily there. Your lack of numbers. Cavalry, if they get caught flat-footed, aren't doing anything. They're just, double the points cost of regular infantry doing regular infantry things on bigger bases. So your opponent gets more, base contact around them, easier to kill them, so on and so on. It's high risk, high reward. High risk, absolutely demoralizing losses where you want to go and cry yourself to sleep. So
yep, and I will say the best way to learn is to lose.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
If you someone who's thinking of picking up all cavalry and you start losing, don't be discouraged by it. It's the best way to learn. Think about what was the reason that you lost, and the next game you play, try to avoid doing that particular thing, and you'll find that over time, that's how you improve.
There's that,
and the ceiling's very high.
Age-old adage of you never learn from your victories, you learn from your losses.
The last thing on the slide here is the strategy of envelopment, or preventing yourself from being enveloped. As a Cav army, if you get enveloped, it's curtains, and it's like, I'll sit there with the table, change my mind type thing. Because if you're getting enveloped, you're getting trapped, you're dead, as we've spoken about. As a Cav army, do you think it's crucial, Andrew, to envelop your opponent's battle line, or are you just more focused on not getting enveloped yourself, and how do you do so?
Okay, so I think it's always a benefit to try and envelop your opponent if you can. You can't always, because it depends on what the setup is, but if you can, always a good idea, because it makes your opponent think and question themselves when you have your cavalry up on either flank and they've got to start committing models there. Again, it helps create that yarn ball effect of hoping to try and pull your opponent apart. It also means if you're getting into the back line, they have no spear supports, a cavalry model charging infantry model 1-on-1, that is what you want as often as you can get it. So enveloping is really invaluable for doing that. If you are being enveloped as the cavalry player, that must be pretty impressive for them to. You must have punched through and then gotten stuck, and then they've started to come around you. Because if they've done it well, running with their little legs, that's very impressive. If that does happen, normally what you need to do is you need to find an escape route. So your job is then to see what is the weakest part of this line, throw everything we have into it, and try and push through that gap with as much as we can to get out of here. Because obviously if you are entirely surrounded as a cavalry player and you've got no room to maneuver, your biggest advantage, which is your mobility, is now being completely cut off. So, and like we've said before, our cavalry models, when they're flat-footed and they're not doing much, they're just double infantry on bigger bases that get trapped and die easily.
Typically, whenever I've seen this happen, is a cav army goes and charges without their second wave, and they're just going to go everyone in, Rise to Thaden. It's so tempting to charge everyone in because you want to do as maximum damage and, Deadpool, maximum effort. But all of a sudden, it's like, I've lost a fight here. I've lost a dude there. This is now a big gap. Models, infantry start moving forward with their spear supports, and then they start wrapping, call to combat, wrapping, and then all of a sudden, that snowball effect. Oh my god.
Yes, and that again comes back to our let's plan one turn ahead. You get big charge off. What happens if you lose a heroic move next turn? All your models are stuck. That's, again, it's the same idea. So you want to have your second wave, your guys who are sitting 6 inches back from that conflict, who can then come in and they can peel off those models that are threatening to trap all of your cavalry and get you unstuck.
Imagine sitting there, like, I call a heroic move. You as the cav army goes, have it. Oh,
I've done it.
It's sensational. You will watch your opponent
amazing.
shit themselves.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've gone,
Absolutely.
you can get to 4 or 5 of them. Go for it.
Yeah. Oh,
yeah,
that's how you make them sweat.
Yep.
Moving on, our final thoughts. I think the one thing that I want to get out before that I think we may have potentially missed throughout this little chat is, at certain points levels, do certain armies for an all-cav list become redundant without opening a massive can of worms? We've spoken about Rivendell Knights. We've spoken about Rise of Thaden, and even Farharad. Do you see all lists of cavalry working at all points, or do you think there's definitely like a tier at which some factions work as an all-cav army in certain points?
So I think Rivendell, Rohan, Harad, Angmar, even though that might not be people's first thought, I actually secretly think it's the best cavalry army in the game. I think all of those scale quite well across a lot of points levels. A lot of the other ones, they can fall off at higher points levels. So your Far Harad, it has its gimmick, and the gimmick just continues as you go up in points. Yep. And people bring more and more tools like monsters and magic and all kinds of stuff to be more likely to be able to deal with it. So some of the ones that are really clear to find as designers intended to be cavalry-based forces, those tend to scale well. Some of the other ones, not so much. Something like Morgul Knights, which I quite like as like a fun little quirky list that
terrifying cav.
Yeah, it's very fun. That's part of why Angmar is the best list. Morgul Knights are fun. I'm looking at my display board of Morgul Knights right now. I've got about 20 of them. High points, not so good. People have too many tools to deal with you. But yeah, I think a lot of the ones that I would suggest people try and dip their toes into, the Rohan, the Rivendell, the Harad, the Angmar, those are good across a lot of good points levels. So there's the ones that I'd suggest that people start off with. Gondor's okay, but you're limited in terms of you only can have 1/3 bows. If you don't have the Boromir banner, your fight value is pretty poor, which isn't great when you want to have impactful charges. So that makes them a little bit tricky. You can go a bit of a fun hero hammer style with Gondor if you want to as well, with Boromir of Gondor, like the Fellowship version, and Huron and Faramir and Beregond and all that. That's a fun little list to try out if you want to dip your toes into hero heavy kind of cavalry. But yeah, it really depends on the one itself. The Wolf Pack, I think, is a better low points than high points as well, for sure.
Amen.
Hey, look, the Wolf Pack went, or Paddy Matrega ran the Wolf Pack at Masters and placed, or didn't place relatively well, but went 4-2. But theoretically could have gone 5-1 if it wasn't for a bit of terrain hiccup that, is what is. But yeah, so the Wolfpack, that's great at 550.
Andrew, just to extend on that, why do you say that Angmar is quote unquote one of the best cavalry armies in the game, apart from the Wolfpack? Because you did run the Wolfpack at Masters, and I love your list. And recently, a similar version of your list won over in the Netherlands a couple of weeks ago.
Interesting. Okay. So Angmar is the best because it does things that a cavalry army wants. Got a fair few numbers because Wiles are cheap. Wiles are cheap. They're only 13 points for shield and throwing spear. You have access to fantastic casters, and control is a big part of the cavalry game. Depending on what variation you want, you can do the Gulliver style one where you have a massive, nasty flying beast that you cannot catch that applies all the cavalry in a principal army. Everything a cavalry army wants to do, Gulliver wants to do. You want to pick your opponent apart, you want to pick a point, jump on something, kill it, move out. That's exactly what Gulliver wants to do, and you've got all the tools. Your entire army is set up to make sure he can do that because they can't touch anything else. So you're not being forced to commit with Gulliver because all your orcs on foot have been caught. With a mounted one, he's got complete control. Like I've won 2 Masters playing an all-mounted Angmar with Gulliver. I also really like the new Legendary Legion with the Host of the Witch King. I ran that last weekend with the double casters, and it's incredibly powerful. These armies are specters as well, so you've got that pull out to set yourself up or to pull people off objectives. Terror on everyone, so that makes some armies just make it impossible. Oh, you won the heroic move. Okay, good luck. You might get a couple in. I'll charge the rest. Yeah, so yeah, I just love it because it's got so many great tools to work with, which as a cavalry player you really appreciate.
Sean, any final thoughts, comments, queries from you?
I just want to say, don't run Gondor Cav with the trebuchet. It sounds like a really good idea, but it's not.
Just run, I think, Battle of Fornos, the new Legendary Legion.
Oh, mate, I'm so excited to run that. I'm so excited to run that.
Yep.
Yeah, that'll be big.
Guys, thank you so much for coming on, Andrew.
Of course, pleasure.
I hope we can get you back on probably for the new edition, just to kind of revisit this, see if it's still viable, have the tactics changed, what does it look like, and yeah, potentially, if I'm ever in New South Wales, we'll get a little battle report in, which would be
love to.
Point. So yeah, thanks again, and Sean, do you want to take us out?
From me to you guys watching, from the MGG community to Jay to Andrew, have a lovely day, night, wherever you are in the world. Love you.